Welcome to Monsoon Markets, where Southeast Asia's business stories come alive.
I'm Grace.
And I'm Jackie. From Jakarta's traffic to Singapore's boardrooms, this region moves fast, hits hard, and never follows a straight line.
Every episode, we unpack a company at the center of that energy, how it grew, how it fought, and how it thrived in one of the world's most complex markets.
This is Monsoon Markets. Let's get started. All right, Grace, let me start with a simple question. When you hear the country Austria, what's the first thing that pops in your mind?
Honestly, classical music, like very serious people in beautiful buildings. Mozart, in a way, everything feels precise, very oddly.
Yeah, Mozart is a good one. Precision, structure, music so carefully arranged, it almost feels engineered.
Exactly, like every note is supposed to be there. No chaos allowed.
And then on the complete other end of the spectrum, Arnold Schwarzenegger,
Oh my god, yes, I'll be back. Muscles, discipline, persistence. Like lift the same thing a thousand times until reality gives up.
right, effort repeated long enough changes outcomes. So on one side, refinement. On the other, raw strength. Both stand for part of Austria.
Which is kind of funny because those two don't feel related at all. But somehow Austria owns both.
And that's why, on the surface, it feels totally natural that one of the world's most famous energy drinks comes from Austria Red Bull. Clean logo, blue and silver can, global sports, extreme stance, marketing excellence.
Flying people off cliffs. Formula One, that guy jumping from space. Red Bull feels expensive, controlled, very intentional.
And that's how the story is usually told. An Austrian brand built by an Austrian, Marches, turned into a global icon.
Which is not wrong.
Not wrong, but incomplete.
Okay, so this is the part where you tell me everything I think I know is missing a huge chunk,
Exactly, because before Red Bull existed, there was Dang.
which already sounds very not Austrian.
True, Dang is Thai, and in Thailand, the name literally means Red Bull.
Like literally.
Literally. Klating is a wild bull, a large, powerful bovine native to Southeast Asia. Dang means red.
So, not a metaphor, not branding poetry.
Nope, just a direct description of strength and stamina.
I kind of love that. Very straightforward, very punchy.
And that tells you something important. Klating Dang wasn't designed for extreme sports or lifestyle marketing. It wasn't about image.
So, who was it for?
People working long hours, often in heat, often physically demanding jobs. Truck drivers, factory workers, construction workers, people who didn't have much margin for fatigue.
So, less snowboarding in the Alps, more just get through the day. Sounds much like me.
Me too. And this is where most analysis of Red Bull goes incomplete.
Let me guess. We usually talk only about the Austrian part,
Almost exclusively. The focus is all about March's branding genius and marketing empire.
which, to be fair, is impressive.
Absolutely. But what gets far less attention is that the product already existed and it already made sense, just in a very different market.
So, Red Bull didn't start with a blank sheet of paper.
Not at all. It started with translation.
Okay, I like that word. Translation, not invention.
And that's why today's episode is really about. We're going to tell the story from the beginning, the very beginning, not in Austria, but in Thailand.
First, we'll look at the energy drink category itself and why Southeast Asia became one of its earliest and most important markets. Then, Karatin Dan and the family behind it. Why this drink worked long before it ever went global.
After that, we'll look at how much it's succeeded, not by inventing something new, but by translating a local product for a global context.
And we'll compare Red Bull with Monster, especially through a Southeast Asian lens, which is actually very different from the US story.
Finally, we'll talk about the risks facing energy drinks today, health concerns, regulation, and what the future of this category might look like.
This isn't just a story about the branding miracle of Red Bull, but about its origin and translation. We'll look closely at how a very local product makes the leap to the global stage.
If we zoom out, the real question isn't who invented energy drinks, it's why they showed up here first in Southeast Asia.
Right, because once you line up the conditions, it almost feels inevitable. Not clever, not lucky, just necessary.
The well accepted first energy drink in the world might be Lipovitan D, launched in 1962 in Japan by Taishu Pharmaceutical. Unlike coffee or cola, it was the first time that a product made the explicit promise of restoring energy and fighting fatigue. After that, the energy drink got popular in Southeast Asia.
Post war Japan and much of Southeast Asia rebuilt through labor intensive growth. Factories, transport, agriculture, small businesses. Output scaled with working hours. And that kind of economy produces a very specific type of fatigue, not a kernel tiredness, chronic exhaustion,
Exactly. Workers didn't get flexible schedules or recovery time, they got longer shifts.
which means from a product perspective, you are not giving motivation, you are solving fatigue.
Fast stimulation, predictable results, something you can carry, drink quickly, and get back to work.
And that explains why early energy drinks weren't treated like beverages at all. They were framed as remedies.
Health tonics or medical tonics.
That framing does a lot of business work. It gives permission, it builds trust. It says this isn't indulgence, this is maintenance.
And you see that in the form factor. Small glass bottles, concentrated doses, not something you sip slowly.
Almost like take this and keep going.
Now, layer climate issue on top of that.
This is where Western intuition often breaks down. In hot, humid environments, fatigue isn't theoretical, it's physical and immediate.
The weather is always hot. You sweat more, you dehydrate faster, your energy drops earlier in the day, and sugar plus caffeine deliver something incredibly important instant feedback. You feel the effect right away.
Which matters more than long term optimization when you are exhausted at 2 p.m.
And culturally, this wasn't a leap. Sweet drinks were already accepted as quick energy sugarcane juice, sweet tea, condensed milk coffee.
So energy drinks didn't need to educate consumers, they just packaged and standardized something people already believed in.
That's a much easier business problem to solve, especially when regulation and culture don't block you.
Western markets draw a hard line between food and medicine, and that line makes functional claims expensive and risky. But in many Asian markets, that line was softer, which allowed drinks to sit comfortably in the gray zone, promising vitality, stamina, or strength without requiring pharmaceutical level proof.
That regulatory flexibility let the category exist early and scale fast.
It also shaped consumer expectations. People weren't skeptical, they were receptive.
Now, combine that with income levels.
This part is crucial. Consumers weren't just tired, they were also price sensitive. But the winning product wasn't cheap in absolute terms. It was efficient, high impact for a small amount of money.
A small bottle delivering a noticeable effect made economic sense. High energy per taiba or high energy per Japanese yen.
That logic didn't exist in wealthier Western societies where fatigue could be treated with rest, leisure, or coffee culture.
And finally, there's the social layer. Endurance wasn't just common, it was respected in Asia's culture. Working late, pushing through exhaustion.
Not complaining.
Right, energy drinks fit that mindset perfectly.
They weren't an escape from expectations. They were tools to meet them.
So, when energy drinks eventually appeared in the West, they didn't invent a new category, they reinterpreted an existing one.
What started in Asia as a functional response to labor, climate, and economics was repackaged as performance, rebellion, and extreme sports.
Same product, different story.
And that difference is exactly what makes a Red Bull moment possible.
Now, let's zoom in on Southeast Asia itself, because this is where the category behaves very differently from what most Western listeners expect. In this region, energy drinks are not a niche product or a youth subculture. They function as an everyday utility.
The distinction really matters. In the West, energy drinks are tied to nightlife, extreme sports, or gaming. In Southeast Asia, they are tied to daily survival and routine.
You see this across the region. Energy drinks consistently serve three overlapping needs: physical endurance, coping with heat, and economic efficiency. They are not about identity, they are about function.
And that's why dismissing them as just sugar and caffeine misses the point entirely. If you only look at ingredients, you miss what actually made the category work.
Because the real innovation wasn't chemical, it was behavioral.
Energy drinks standardized energy in a way no previous beverage had. Before this category, caffeine consumption was inconsistent and unpredictable.
Coffee could be weak or overpowering depending on who made it, how it was brewed, and how big the cup was. Tea varied by steeping time. Cola was diluted and designed for refreshment, not alertness.
Energy drinks replaced all of that uncertainty with a fixed, repeatable dose. Almost like medicine, honestly. You drink it and you know what effect you'll get.
That predictability mattered enormously for drivers, factory workers, and laborers. It turned stimulation from a vague habit into a controllable tool.
And once energy becomes controllable, it becomes something you can plan around. That's a big shift in behavior, not just consumption.
The second breakthrough was about time. Energy drinks compressed the entire experience.
They removed time from the equation almost completely. No brewing, no waiting, no sitting down.
A small bottle could be consumed in 10 seconds and deliver sugar and caffeine designed for rapid absorption. What used to take 10 or 15 minutes for tea or coffee was reduced to moments.
And in hot, high pressure environments, those minutes actually matter. Breaks are costly, sometimes unaffordable.
Energy drinks weren't optimized for enjoyment or ritual. They were optimized for effectiveness per second, and energy drinks acknowledged a reality other beverages ignore. People often need energy immediately, not eventually. That design choice alone explains a lot of their success.
The third, and probably most underestimated shift, was the removal of social friction. This is where energy drinks really diverge from coffee or tea. Coffee implies leisure, or at least a pause. Tea implies culture, ceremony, maybe even conversation.
Even cola carries a sense of casual indulgence. Energy drinks carry none of that.
They are salutary, functional, and justified by necessity. You can drink one on a motorbike, in a truck, or on a factory floor without explanation.
No seat required, no conversation required, no permission required.
And in societies where endurance is valued and stopping can feel risky or weak, that's incredibly important. Energy drinks normalized the idea that managing fatigue isn't indulgent, it's responsible.
When you put all of this together, you get something genuinely new. Standardization made energy predictable, compression made it fast, and removing social friction made it usable anywhere.
Energy drinks didn't invent energy, they invented control over exhaustion. Once you see them that way, they stop looking like a trivial sugar caffeine trick. They start looking like infrastructure.
That infrastructure view completely changes how the business works. Because if energy drinks are daily staples, distribution matters more than branding.
Availability beats aspiration every time. Most energy drinks aren't bought after consideration. They're bought the moment fatigue hits.
For a truck driver or night shift worker, the decision window is measured in seconds. If the product isn't there, the decision never happens.
And Southeast Asian retail is highly fragmented. Small, independent outlets dominate, especially outside major cities.
These stores don't respond to global advertising campaigns, they respond to margins, reliability of supply, and personal relationship.
A brand can be famous on billboards and completely invisible on shelf. And if it's not on the shelf, it doesn't exist.
This effect is amplified because energy drinks are low consideration, high frequency purchases. People don't plan ahead, they don't stock up, they buy what's cold, affordable, and immediately available.
That structurally favored brands that invest in unglamorous distribution, daily truck routes, rural wholesalers, credit terms for small shops. In Southeast Asia, the last mile is often the only mile that matters.
Great point, and this structure produces a very different competitive landscape.
There isn't one champion. Instead, you see a layered ecosystem. Local incumbents, regional champions, and global brands all coexisting. Thailand is probably the clearest example of just how extreme this gets.
It may be the most competitive energy drink market in the world. On average, people in Thailand consume about 3 gallons of energy drinks per adult per year.
Per adult, when I first saw that number, I was shocked. That's roughly three times the per capita consumption in the United States.
That is surprising indeed, because in the United States, energy drinks feel omnipresent. They are loud, visible, and culturally prominent.
But in Thailand, they're quiet and constant. It's not intensity, it's frequency.
That's why three local brands, M150, Carabao Dang, and Klating Dang, control roughly 80% of the market. They sell at around 10 baht per glass bottle.
About 32 US cents. Meanwhile, Austrian Red Bull sits at the opposite end of the spectrum, imported from Europe, selling for around 73 baht per can.
That's more than 7 times the price of local players, and it dominates almost the entire premium segment. Same category, completely different economics. And that contrast finally sets up the central question of this story: how a Thai utility became a global premium icon. To understand why Klating Dang mattered so much, we have to go back to Thailand in the 1970s.
At that time, Thailand didn't actually have a clearly defined energy drink category. This sounds strange now because it feels so obvious in hindsight. But back then, fatigue was addressed in very fragmented ways.
Exactly. You had pharmaceutical tonics, traditional herbal remedies, and everyday soft drinks. Each one touched fatigue indirectly, but none treated energy and alertness as a normal, repeatable part of working life.
So energy existed as an idea, but not as a routine behavior. It wasn't something you just managed day after day,
And that's the gap cladding then entered.
not as a miracle product, but as a very practical answer to a very common problem.
It was developed for people dealing with regular physical and mental fatigue. Long distance drivers, factory workers, laborers working extended hours. From the beginning, its purpose wasn't symbolic.
It wasn't about refreshment or enjoyment, and it definitely wasn't about healing or curing anything.
It was about restoring alertness.
It sounds simple, but that clarity is actually rare. Most products try to do too many things at once.
What made Gliding Dang distinctive was how clearly that purpose showed up in the formulation itself. Nothing felt accidental.
I don't like its taste, to be honest, but at the ingredient level, it's almost textbook. Sugar for immediate energy, caffeine for alertness, taurine to smooth and stabilize the effect, and B vitamins to support energy metabolism, or concentrated into a small glass bottle designed to be consumed quickly.
Speed, predictability, and completeness in one serving. That's a very deliberate product philosophy, and just as important as what Gliding Dan included was what it excluded.
This part matters a lot for the later global story.
It avoided medicinal actives and avoided herbal ingredients. Compared to the pharmaceutical tonics, it didn't frame fatigue as a health condition.
And compared to herbal tonics, it didn't require belief or cultural explanation. Herbal formulations were deeply tied to traditional Thai belief systems, which made them powerful locally but difficult to translate elsewhere.
You can't export cultural context as easily as you export a formula.
Correct. Compared to soft drinks, creatine then didn't rely on taste, refreshment, or social consumption. It wasn't trying to be pleasant, but to be effective to treat fatigue as a routine condition of work,
That framing changed everything. Because if fatigue is routine, consumption can be routine too.
which removes stigma. You don't hesitate, you don't justify, you just drink it.
Over time, that led to habitual use rather than occasional use. Habit, not preference, became the basis of demand.
And habits are much stronger than tastes. They don't ask for novelty, they ask for reliability.
By the late 1970s, Gliding Dang had effectively defined a new functional space between medicine and soft drinks in Thailand.
Other products existed, but none occupied that middle ground with the same clarity. That's an important distinction.
And this context matters a lot for what happens next. Because when Matshis later encountered Gliding Dang, it didn't just stand out, it made sense.
That raises an obvious question. If the market was already competitive, why did Granting Dan get so lucky to be chosen?
In hindsight, people often ask why other Thai energy brands weren't part of this story. The answer is mostly timing.
M150 entered the market in the late 1970s, not long after Granting Dan. But when Marches encountered Granting Dan in 1980s, M150 was still scaling and more closely tied to pharmaceutical roots.
And Kabao Dang, which interestingly means red buffalo in Thai, didn't enter the market until 2002. It simply didn't exist yet.
Gratindam, at the moment of discovery, offered something its alternatives couldn't, a clean, already normalized functional logic.
Independent of medicine, independent of tradition, and independent of refreshment.
That's why it became the foundation of the Austrian Red Bull, not because it was flashy, but because it was structurally ready to be translated.
So, by the time Klating Dang had established this clean functional position in Thailand, the product itself was already unusually clear. But a product like that doesn't exist in isolation. It reflects the people who built it.
Yeah, and this is where the story quietly shifts from product design to ownership design, because who controls something like writing then turns out to matter just as much as what's inside the bottle.
Klating Dang was developed by Kun Chaleo Uvidia, the founder of TC Pharmaceutical. Over time, the Uvidia family rose to become Thailand's wealthiest family, a position they've held for years, with wealth estimated at about 44 billion US dollars.
However, Kun Chalio didn't come from a elite business family or a corporate background. He started in sales and distribution, which feels very consistent with everything we've talked about so far.
Exactly. He worked inside pharmaceutical trade, moving everyday products through a fragmented retail system that gave him first-hand exposure to what actually mattered on the ground.
No theory, not brand decks, but how products survive shop by shop.
And that experience shaped how TC Pharmaceutical was built. The company didn't try to become a diversified conglomerate. Instead, it focused on a narrow set of products with very clear demand and repeat usage. That's a very disciplined choice.
Manufacturing was standardized early, distribution was prioritized over branding, and operational consistency mattered more than visibility. That's almost the opposite of how Western consumer brands usually grow.
TC Pharmaceutical was designed to be durable, not impressive.
This also explains how the family ran it. The Uvidia family kept the company tightly controlled and privately held.
Ownership wasn't spread across outside investors. Decision-making authority stayed concentrated. That reduces internal disagreement. But more importantly, it enables long time horizons. You don't have to optimize for quarterly narratives.
By the time Kratingdan was firmly established in Thailand, the family had something many larger firms lacked. They had absolute clarity over who controlled the asset,
Control preceded expansion.
which turns out to be critical for what happens next.
When Martschitz later encountered Clatting and proposed adapting it for other markets, he wasn't negotiating with a committee. He wasn't dealing with a state owned enterprise or a licensing maze. He was talking to a family that could make a single binding decision.
That's why the result wasn't a licensing deal or a formula sale. It became a joint venture with shared ownership.
This is a very different mindset. Licensing is about extracting value, partnership is about building it.
Both sides were now structurally committed to the long term success of the brand.
And the family consciously chose partnership over monetization, even though that's not the obvious choice.
But it reflects a broader Thai family business tradition. Many successful Thai families prioritize keeping core assets under control, even when quick capital gains are available.
Selling control is often seen as giving up future options. Ownership isn't just equity, it's optionality.
Another defining trait of the Uvidia family was discretion. They didn't position themselves as public founders or brand symbols, which is really unusual when you compare it to Western entrepreneurship. They didn't seek recognition through the product.
That separation between ownership and brand identity turned out to be flexible. It allowed Red Bull to be positioned freely in global markets.
without being tied to a Thai narrative or a family story or a national identity that might limit interpretation.
It also reduced the risk. The core product logic stayed conservative and unchanged.
While branding and marketing experimentation happened at the surface level, if a campaign failed, the system underneath was untouched.
Over time, this governance style proved unusually resilient, even as competition intensified in Thailand and leadership evolved.
The family didn't force global strategy to serve local prestige. They allowed different markets to play different roles.
High business culture tolerates uneven outcomes as long as control remains intact.
And in practical terms, the family's contribution wasn't day to day brand management, it was boundary setting.
The product could be reframed, marketing could be bold, distribution could evolve, but ownership, formulation logic, and long term direction stayed stable.
That combination, a functional product, clean ownership, and culture of patience is what made global scaling possible without losing coherence.
Now we can finally talk about what happens when this Thai foundation meets Austrian ambition. By the early 1980s, Glating Dang had already proved its value in Thailand. It had habitual users. It solved a real recurring problem in people's daily lives.
And that's important because this wasn't a fragile product or a local experiment. It has already passed the market test that most products fail. People kept coming back to it without needing persuasion.
What Glating Dang lacked at that point wasn't effectiveness or demand, it lacked reach beyond its home context.
And the reason wasn't technical. It wasn't that the formula couldn't travel or that the product couldn't scale.
The limits were cultural, regulatory, and perceptual. Outside Southeast Asia, Klatingdang didn't fit neatly into any existing category.
It could easily be misunderstood as medicine, dismissed as something ethnic or regional, or ignored as a niche tonic. And once a product gets boxed into the wrong category, it's very hard to escape.
That's the key idea here. A functional product doesn't automatically become a global product.
Function can cross borders, but meaning usually cannot. And meaning is what determines how people even notice a product.
This is where Matches finally enters the story, not as the creator of the function, but as the person capable of translating it.
That already tells us something about his role. He wasn't an inventor looking for idea. He was a translator looking for something that already worked.
Before Red Bull, Matches wasn't known as a founder or a visionary entrepreneur. He was trained as a marketer.
And not the flashy kind, more the kind that deals with constraints.
He spent much of his early career at Blendex, a toothpaste brand owned by Unilever. His job was adapting established products across different markets.
That means adjusting packaging, messaging, and positioning to fit local expectations. It's slow, detailed work that forces you to respect how different markets actually behave.
And one lesson he learned early was that many products fail internationally, not because they are weak, but because they are misread.
That's such an underrated insight. A good product can die simply because people don't know where to place it in their minds.
Martschitz had a habit of observing how consumers behaved when products crossed borders. He paid attention to those moments of confusion.
Which turns out to matter a lot later.
In 1982, During work-related travel in Asia, Martius encountered Dang in Thailand. He needed it to deal with jet lag.
And what's interesting is that this wasn't a dramatic moment. There is no legend of instant obsession.
What stood out wasn't surprise, it was clarity. The effect was clear and the purpose was simple.
It did exactly what it promised, and nothing more. That kind of honesty is rare.
He didn't see a Thai brand that needed exporting. He saw a functional logic that had already been solved, but only locally.
And to someone trained in adaptation rather than invention, that's immediately recognizable. You don't think, how do I change this? You think, how do I make others understand it?
At that time, Dang faced real barriers in Western markets. The taste profile didn't align with European beverage norms.
The small glass bottle looked medicinal. Culturally, people didn't yet have a mental category for an energy drink.
Regulatory frameworks also required careful navigation. Anything that looked like a tonic invited scrutiny.
Without translation, function risks being misclassified. And once that happened, adoption stops before it even begins.
Martschid's role was to stand between system, between Southeast Asian work culture and Western consumer culture.
He preserved the core energy, alertness, repeat use while changing how that core was communicated.
That meant reframing the product away from medicine and fatigue, adjusting formulation details to fit local standards.
Designing packaging that felt natural in Western retail environments, and building a story around performance instead of necessity.
Crucially, all of these changes happened around the product, not inside its logic.
The function stayed intact, the meaning changed.
Meanwhile, Dang also needed a Western partner because the obstacles it faced were institutional, not operational.
Thai manufacturers at the time didn't have deep access to European media, distributors, or regulators, and there wasn't much incentive to take on that kind of risk.
Martschids operated comfortably inside those systems. He reduced uncertainty on the receiving side, not on the producing side.
Now, let's look at his first concrete intervention, the product itself.
Dang was reformulated into a carbonated beverage. That single decision shifted perception immediately.
Carbonation made it feel closer to a soft drink than a tonic. It moved the product into a familiar Western category without changing its purpose.
And it actually tastes much better. Then came the packaging, and this was just as deliberate. The original glass bottle was practical and utilitarian. Marches replaced it with a slain blue and silver can. It looked cold, modern, and technical, more like a performance tool than a sugary drink. In a Western fridge or bar, it stood out instantly, and it signaled premium rather than necessity. That wasn't cosmetic, it was cultural translation.
Finally, he reshaped the identity itself from a locally known energy booster to Red Bull, a brand about ambition, youth, and performance, not about getting through a long shift.
Instead of traditional advertising, he embedded the product in nightlife, extreme sports, and emerging subcultures. By tightly controlling early distribution and maintaining exclusivity, he ensured the brand carried meaning before mass scale.
Which is incredibly difficult to pull off. Most brands try to scale first and explain later.
What Marches ultimately did sounds simple, but execution wise, it's rare.
He translated a local necessity into a global aspiration without breaking the logic that make it work.
That bridge from Dang to Red Bull is what transforms this from a Thai success story into a global one. So, once Red Bull is translated successfully into the West, something interesting happens. The category doesn't just scale, it invites comparison and competition.
Right, because once energy drinks become legible globally, you don't just ask, does this work? You start asking, what kind of energy drink is this?
And that's why Red Bull and Monster are so often grouped together. They sell similar products, sponsor similar events, and sit on the same shelves.
From the outside, they look like obvious rivals. Same aisle, same caffeine at similar price.
But they were built from very different instincts. And once you see that, the divergence becomes obvious.
Almost philosophical, actually.
Red Bull grew out of a belief that the product itself should stay stable. The drink is consistent, tightly controlled, and rarely explained. Sports, media, performance narratives, moments of intensity. Red Bull builds meaning around the product.
Monster takes a much more conventional consumer goods approach. The product itself is expressive. Flavors multiply, can sizes vary, viral presence is aggressive. Growth comes from range expansion and shelf impact. The brand speaks loudly, directly, and often through attitude.
At a very basic level, Red Bull assumes energy is a constant need. Monster assumes energy is a choice. And that single difference shapes almost everything that follows.
Globally, Red Bull behaves less like a beverage company and more like a media and culture company that happens to sell a drink. People often encounter Red Bull through events, videos, or athletes before they ever touch the can.
Monster behaves more like a high performance FMCG business. It competes inside existing retail and cultural spaces. Visibility, promotions, variety. That's how trial and repeat purchase are driven.
Even their capital structures reinforce this split.
Monster is a public company with deep ties to the Coca Cola Company for distribution. It's optimized for speed, scale, and volume.
Meanwhile, Red Bull is privately held. It's under far less pressure to expand the product line or maximize short term throughput.
Globally, both models work, but they work differently depending on the market they enter. And nowhere is that difference clearer than in Southeast Asia.
Because in Southeast Asia, energy drinks aren't an emerging lifestyle category. They've been a functional one for decades.
Long before global brands arrived, consumers already understood energy drinks as tools for work and endurance.
That context changes how brands are evaluated.
Red Bull enters Southeast Asia as something that feels familiar, even when it's positioned as premium or global.
The branding might emphasize performance or aspiration, but the underlying logic matches how the category already works.
In that sense, Red Bull feels like an upgrade, a familiar product with some exotic style.
Not a reinvention.
And Monster enters the same markets with a very different proposition. Large cans, lots of flavors, strong visual identity. That signals abundance and choice, which works well in markets where energy drinks behave like soft drinks.
But in Southeast Asia, energy drinks are often consumed quickly, purposefully, and repeatedly. Large formats can feel exhaustive. Flavor variety matters less than predictability.
What looks like value in one market can look like inefficiency in another.
Monster is very visible in Southeast Asia, especially in modern trade and urban centers. But visibility doesn't always turn into habit. Consumption tends to cluster around leisure, nightlife, or younger consumers. less around daily routines.
Distribution amplifies this contrast. Monster benefits from Coca-Cola's bottling system, fast rollout, wide availability, but Red Bull's distribution is often more selective.
But that selectivity helps preserve context, when and why the drink is consumed. Culturally, Red Bull's emphasis on performance and capability aligns more comfortably with how effort and work are framed in many Southeast Asian societies.
Monster's louder, more rebellious tone resonates strongly with certain segments, but less evenly across age groups and geographies.
So the result isn't that one brand wins and the other loses.
Right. Both sell, both grow. They just target different users at different moments for different reasons. So, once you step back from the competition, there's a bigger question sitting underneath all of this. What happens when energy drinks stop being niche tools and become mainstream habits?
And that's where the story gets more complicated because the risks don't belong to one brand anymore. They belong to the category.
As energy drinks moved into everyday consumption, the downsides became more visible, not just to regulators, but to the public.
And importantly, the concern isn't about occasional use. It's about routine use layered onto already unhealthy lifestyles.
High caffeine, high sugar, irregular sleep, sedentary behavior. Energy drinks often coexist with all of that.
They are not always the root cause, but more like an amplifier.
But public narratives rarely make that distinction. Causality gets simplified.
So energy drinks end up carrying blame for a much broader set of problems.
Health concerns linked to heavy consumption are well known now. Insomnia, anxiety, cardiovascular strain, weight gain.
And over the long term, metabolic risks like obesity and type 2 diabetes. Those associations are becoming harder to ignore.
In Western markets, binge consumption, especially mixed with alcohol, has drawn the most scrutiny. And as energy drinks spread into more occasions globally, that scrutiny travels too. It's no longer just a Western issue.
For brands like Red Bull, this creates a structural challenge. The original logic of the category was targeted, purposeful use. Drink it when you need it. Don't drink it mindlessly.
But as consumption broadens, that discipline erodes. The category is no longer judged by how it was designed, it's judged by how people actually use it. And those two things are drifting apart. This tension becomes even more complex in Southeast Asia.
Because here, energy drinks are deeply embedded in work culture. Daily consumption is normal.
At the same time, the region is seeing rising rates of obesity, diabetes, and lifestyle related illness, especially in rapidly urbanizing populations.
So you end up with a real policy dilemma. On one hand, energy drinks function as normalized tools that support work and endurance. On the other hand, public health systems are under increasing pressure.
The result isn't a single unified regulatory response, it's fragmentation.
Some markets move faster than others. Thailand and the Philippines, for example, have implemented or strengthened sugar tax that directly affect energy drinks.
Other countries like Vietnam and Indonesia have taken a more gradual approach, more emphasis on labeling, education, and public awareness. But policymakers there are also evaluating taxation as a future measure. What's interesting is that regulation in Southeast Asia tends to reflect fiscal and public health pressure more than moral judgment.
It's not saying the product is bad, it's saying we need to manage the consequences.
But that unevenness matters for companies operating across the region. because suddenly neighboring markets require different formulations, price points, and compliance strategies.
Geographically close, politically distinct. And over time, the biggest risk may not be a sudden crackdown, it's gradual normalization of restriction, incremental sugar taxes, marketing constraints, public health campaigns that slowly shift perceptions.
Step by step, energy drinks risk being reframed from useful tools to avoidable indulgences. And once a category loses its functional legitimacy, recovery is difficult.
Because you are no longer arguing about features or branding, you are arguing about whether the product should exist at all.
For Red Bull and its peers, the real question isn't whether the category will change, it's whether it can adapt without breaking the trust that made it viable in the first place.
And that tension between function, habit, and health is where the next chapter of this category will be written, not only by marketers alone, but also by regulators, consumers, and culture itself.
If there's a broader lesson in the Red Bull and Glating Dang story, it's probably not about energy drinks, but about how products from Southeast Asia can and often cannot travel beyond their original context.
Yeah, that feels important because Southeast Asia produces a lot of products that work really well locally. For example, pandan juice for hot days or tiger balm for sore muscles. They solve real problems, fit into daily routines, and make economic sense.
What they often lack isn't quality or demand, it's translation.
Global markets don't reject function, they reject unfamiliar meaning.
Gladding Dang worked well in Thailand because its function was clear and disciplined long before it ever went abroad. That clarity mattered.
It meant the product could be reframed without being distorted. The story could change without breaking what makes it useful.
The function stayed intact, only the narrative moved.
And that suggests something important for Southeast Asian brands with global ambition. Going global doesn't mean exporting culture wholesale. It means separating what's essential from what's contextual.
This story also highlights the role of partnership. Gladding Dang didn't succeed globally by trying harder or marketing louder.
It succeeded because it found the right bridge, someone who understood both where the product came from and where it was going.
That kind of translation is rare and is hard to be rushed, but requires patience, trust, experience, and restraint.
Next time when you're in Bangkok, take a walk through Chatuchak Market, the largest weekend market in the world. You will see thousands of local products built for very specific needs. And somewhere between the food stalls and the tiny glass bottles, you might be looking at the next Krating Dan or the next Red Bull hiding in plain sight. Thanks for listening to Monsoon Markets, where Southeast Asia's business stories come alive.
If you enjoyed the episode, follow or subscribe and share it with someone who cares about Southeast Asia.
We'll be back soon with another journey through the region.
Until then, stay curious.